We begin the session, I would like to make a few housekeeping notes. So we do have some events for those who have joined us in person, and this is to really show our gratitude to you. Now, as you can see here, this is a session review event, so please take photos of you being here in this session and use the hashtag Ocean Environment and Climate and upload the photo review on Instagram. Do not forget to use the hashtag Ocean Environment and Climate. And also make sure that you participate in the survey so that we can improve next time. Please scan the QR code on the screen to participate in the satisfaction survey, and we will make sure to improve next year. And there is also a stamp tour event in the lobby, so please participate in that event as well. And we also have an international speaker, so please make full use of the receiver on the table. It's now time to begin the session. So I will first introduce myself and begin the forum. Welcome back to IIOF 2024. We are joined by the audience in person and also virtually. And it's a pleasure to see you again. My name is La Young-nan, and it is my delight to be your MC today following yesterday. Thank you very much for your enthusiasm and interest in the maritime industry. Yesterday, we shared a lot of insight and ideas together with experts from home and abroad. And today, we are here at the Ocean Environment and Climate. Given that we face multiple crises in terms of environment and climate, I believe that we need to take action right now, and this session will be of great help in showing us the direction forward. I very much look forward to the session. So we will hear 3 presentations, and that will be followed by a panel discussion. So thank you very much for joining us today. I will first introduce the first speaker. First, we have Mr. Lee Sang, the Principal Research Scientist at Korea Polar Research Institute, who will talk about the rapid changes in the oceans and polar regions, along with rising sea levels in a warming world. Please give Mr. Lee a big hand.
Good morning, everyone. Well, thank you for coming early in the morning. And it is my great honor and pleasure to be able to speak with you. As was introduced, my name is Lee Sang. I'm working at KOPRI, Korea Polar Research Institute, at KIOST, Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology. In order to talk about what I have prepared today, we have to first think of the very steep changes in the maritime and polar environment. And also we are witnessing the changes in the sea level and what kind of expectations we can have for the future of the sea level. And then I'll be talking about what we have to do from now on. Climate change has been decades-old word to all of you. When we talk about changes, changes have dual meanings. Sometimes it can be positive, sometimes it can be negative. Whenever we have a name for a thing or an environment, we can have variations of our feelings about the object that we are describing. It can be negative or sometimes it can be positive note. And you might wonder why we have to have a fuss about such changes in the climate when these can be something natural. But we believe that more and more changes are coming to us in the future. And then the word climate has been a buzzword ever since we were just knowing about it. And then we decided to have something in advance in order to prevent negative changes of the climate. That's why we, in a way, used word crisis instead of changes at some point of time. And then we want to make it a something political. Therefore, with the political agenda, we now decided to have the word climate emergency. Emergency is something that requires responses at the national level. When we use the word emergency, we can be reminded of the urgency of something we have to do about the climate. Now you might wonder what are actually happening in climate that we have to use this word of emergency. This picture might be a mystery if it was shown to you about a decade ago, but now you could guess about it. And also for the scholars and scientists who are studying climate changes have been showing us the data to give the explanation about what is happening over the years. And then also sometimes it is very difficult for the layman to understand what the scholar is saying with the numbers and data only. That is why a scholar in the UK some years ago decided to make it a graph like this with the color, and this is to give you some kind of sense of urgency about the changes of the climate. I once had a lecture where I asked a question about this, and I asked the children what do they think about this, and that they said that's a kind of brand of a clothes, but that's not it. What this graph with the picture and the bars explains is the changes of the global average temperature between 1850 to 2023. And then you see the number of the year here. And then if you deduct the number of the average, it if it is lower than the average, it is blue color. However, it is above the average, it can be in the red color. So as time goes by, if you see the graph here, we are in a very hot period because everything is now getting red and also redder. If you recall your memory, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of the UN had a meeting in COP21 to talk about their measures to return the temperature rise after Industrial Revolution and to maintain the increase of the temperature up to 2 degrees Celsius. And that was the agreement made by all the participants there, and we could have anticipated that we could do something, we could prevent the rise of the temperature above that limit. However, things didn't work that way, and we couldn't feel the right responses being made on this because last year, according to the announcement made by the CMP, overall, global temperature has already exceeded 1.5 degrees above the Industrial Revolution level. Paris Agreement aimed at 2 degrees Celsius as a limit, but 6 years ago at this location, they had special report of UN was agreed upon, and then they said that if it is above 2 degrees above the Industrial Revolution, it is irrevocable. Therefore, we should put that limit down to the 1.5 degrees increase. In order to do that, we have to have the energy policies and we have to change our mode of living. And that was what the report said. But as mentioned, we learned that it is already passing 1.5 degree limit. Are we really doing our job in order to curb down this increase of temperature? So we have to be reminded of ourselves. You see, all across the world, extreme weathers are coming to us. As you see from these pictures in Australia, for example, wildfire is while some other areas are experiencing drought and flood and melting of water is also being experienced. Not just hot weather, but also the cold weather are experienced. That's part of extreme weathers. If you see the third report of the IPCC, you can understand why we are experiencing such extreme weathers academically. So this explains what happens in the global temperature. So if on the left side, if this is a normal distribution of the global temperature, so if we have the much warmer temperature, that probability is higher than now. That's what it explains. in the graphs here. So you see the uncertainties of the climate changes, and the variability is increasing, and the variance is also going up. If that happens, the tails are widening. So if it is normal distribution, the area within this center part, if it is constant, the other side, if it presses down, the tails on either side will be bigger in area. It means that the probability of having extreme weathers is increasing. So as you see that if the temperatures are going up, the variance in the tail will have higher numbers. So at this situation, we are changing toward this. So with very extreme weathers like very hot temperature, we will see that those happenings will be coming to us at much higher probability. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, already 3 years have passed. So assessment report was out as the sixth one. So a lot of things have mentioned, but I can summarize with 3 keywords. Number one, warming is getting faster and faster. Globally, at every location, there's no place that we can hide. Especially in the polar areas, they're at risk. All these happenings are originated by human beings, and that's the essence of the sixth AR assessment report. Among these things, the activities of human beings are the reasons for keeping the temperature within the sphere, and we analyzed what are the areas that we can solve the problems. And then we learned that the ocean is taking up 93.4% of the heat as a big water body to observe of the temperatures. The ocean is a very big thing in size. But as you see here, even though ocean is taking up 93%, we also have other things in here. And then by size, we can see that the ocean exceeds many other elements by far. We have to be able to understand what is really happening inside the ocean in order to tackle the problems of climate change. According to our observations, starting from 1960, especially 1957, we can see that there has been an increase in the ocean heat. And up until 2020, up down to the 2,000 meters from the sea level, we are looking at how much heat is observed inside the water. Then we'll realize that ever since 1970s, sea level related heat has been amassed dramatically, and that has been increasing. Also, especially up until 2019, from 2005 to 2019, we have the cycle of getting the heat. So 133 zettajoule has been observed inside the water, and that is also converted into the heat absorption ratio. Then in 2022, it's also about 2 years ago. In 2022, we had our calculations for the energy resources, including coal and fossil fuels. Then the consumption of the energy has been exceeded by 15 times by the observed heat in the ocean. We were able to observe these things like the data shows. For example, if you have the ship, you can take the water from a bottle, and then also we can look at the salinity of the ocean water. By observing all these things, we can calculate that impact. Also, in 2019 and onward, we had our gadgets put on the water in order to feel the temperature, and we have spread it about 4,000 units of them, and the data collected from those 4,000 units have been used for making this graph. So you see this is Arctic and this is Antarctic. So in Arctic, we still have a long way to go. So the heat absorption can be understood as being observed inside the water, but the activities and changes in the polar areas have not been so much understood. We couldn't go there often. I mean, if we want to, we can go, but it's not that in a common for us to go to the polar areas. That's why we have the lack of understanding about the Arctic and Antarctic areas. Now, you have seen many other graphs to explain why we are experiencing these things, but as you see on this slide here, many bad things are happening in red color in here above the sea level because we have the CO2 concentration and also ENSO impact. And also there are things happening inside the water as well. You must have learned from school at high school there can be also cycles to change all these elements here. For example, we can have the heating of the atmosphere on this side, on the coastal side. Since I'm from the Capri, I can tell you that what is the most impactful here in the polar area is ice. The ice is melt as this media is working. Therefore, we are witnessing melting of ice in a massive way nowadays. One very clear example is like this. It is last year's picture in the polar area, and this is sea ice floating. And historically speaking, the area of sea ice has been dwindled dramatically. So this has been proven in the graph last year. The reduction of the area of the sea ice has been unprecedented. We have to keep our monitoring to look at the future trends if this trend will be continued or not. But you remember every summer, all the news articles will say that we have seen the biggest decrease of the area of the sea ice in the polar areas and the Arctic areas. Maybe that same thing might happen in the Antarctic areas, according to the predictions of many scholars. But once again, we don't know if that is to be repeated over and over in the future. We need to keep monitoring to know that. Once again, why do we have to keep eye on the polar areas? Four things roughly are the things that we have never experienced before. First one, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. We checked the concentration level and as of today is above 425 ppm or above. It means that for the last 2 billion years, this is the highest number of the concentration. So the unit like ppm, parts per million, is to explain how many particles are there out of the total of the 1 million. So if it's 472 particles, and that is causing the big changes of climate, even if there are only 472 seemingly and out of 1 million, that impact is tremendous. So that's the ironic understanding. And then according to the data for the last 3,000 years, we see that the sea level has been rising at the fastest level nowadays. Also, in the Arctic Sea area, the area has been reduced at a dramatic level, and last year was mentioned as the record level of rise of sea level. Also, the glaciers in the polar areas, we see the smallest amount of ice cap, and that is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. What I'm trying to tell you is that we have to understand what is the reason for the sea level rise. So out of the four things, let me focus on sea level thing. And this must be familiar to you. For example, in 2010, 2100, in the future, what could happen that graph shows that we are expecting some changes over there. The scenarios that shows here is showing the extreme cases and also the probable cases as well. We're talking about 2.5 degrees Celsius increase, I believe that my personal opinion is that 4.5 would be the optimal one to expect. According to the IPCC report, by 2100, the sea level rise will be about 8.5, and there can be also a very abnormal line here. What is this? And also, this is the most probable likelihood for the things to happen. So other reports are quite conventional, but this one is quite showing a different direction. So it means that the ice in the polar areas can be melting very quickly. If we understand how fast it is melting, probably it is possible for us to experience twice the fastest growth of the sea level rise than normal expectations that we now. This is about the probabilistic thing, and we cannot know what exactly is happening, but IPCC is expecting that this kind of things can happen as well. And also people say that the IPCC report contains very difficult ideas to understand because of the uncertainties embedded. And then if you see these numbers according to many humanity-based scientists, what kind of databases are we using? We have to put our thought about what kind of data we are collecting. Sea level rise at a global level, if you compare this period to about 3,000 years ago, you will see that this increase is quite steep. And according to IPCC, every year 2.3 or 2.5 meters of rise is being experienced. There are two factors to explain this. Very simply speaking, if you put water on a pot to the brim, there are two things to boil the water. One is to make the water boiling over the pot, or the other way is to divide the water into different pots. If the heat is made, the volume is increasing because of the heat expansion. And because of the heat expansion, the rise level has been caused according to our expectation in the past. But nowadays, we have different understanding of the reasons why. We can have the pouring of water. For example, we can have water coming out of the groundwater or the glacial water, which is melting from, for example, in the Alps area, can be contributing to the volume increase. The left at the bottom, you see the thermal expansion contribution, and also in the middle you see the groundwater contribution. Because of this, we understand that rather than heat expansion, we believe that the reason for the sea rise level is because of the melting of the ice sheet in the polar areas. And how much water is being caused by the melting ice that causes this dramatic changes nowadays? So if you see this, most of the waterfall in the world is being preserved in the Arctic areas and the polar areas as ice because they are concentrated. That's about 7 meters height in the Greenland for the ice sheet. In the Antarctic area, it's about 58 meters high because the Antarctic area has the thickness of ice up to 1,000 or sometimes 2,000, so they have a lot of water contained in the ice form there. So this is very simple theory, and if you know the bottom of the land and if you know the height of the ice, then you will see the thickness, and then you can calculate the area, the volume, and you can spread the area above the globe model, then you can see how much rise can be happening. So if this is changing, do we see the result overnight? That's a question coming from many people. But this is something that is happening in the global level. And if we have some protection coming to this, maybe it will take a lot of time that we do not experience any damage right away, maybe within our generation. But I believe that the imminent question to raise now is if we can really prevent it from happening within this generation or not. Now we have the issue of the prediction of the sea level. So I asked around with the scientists how fast or how accurately can you expect the future. So there can be many answers, and they said that there can be many ways of doing this. First of all, the model should be very exact and accurate. So depending on the accuracy of the models and also trustworthiness of the factors within the model, we can understand the reliability of the result. Having said that, the ice in the polar areas is not fully understood nowadays. Therefore, it causes a lot of uncertainties of predicting the future. Therefore, reversely, if we want to accurately predict the future, we have to know more about the glaciers and the polar areas. We have to go there and measure it so that we can have further understanding. On the other hand, on the right side, because of the polar things, Incheon and Busan seem to be very far distanced from the polar areas. Some might ask, why do we have to care about the polar areas when we are so much distanced? However, according to this scenario, even though we are distanced by far, if you look at the map here, you can be affected by the polar areas with these color changes over the course of the years. And these can be attributed to the heat expansion as mentioned and also the melting of the ice. Then if the melting is made from the ice, we can understand how much impact it will be experienced in Incheon if the melting ice and melting water is coming down to this area. Then we can understand the mechanism here. Once again, every year, according to the Korean National Research Institute, we are measuring and observing the sea level, and also Seoul National University is reporting the future predictions. So this is the overall sea level on the average. So you see that on the right side that the east coast is experiencing more sea rise than the other coastal areas. Why is that? Probably because of the temperature rise and the seawater heat expansion is being made on the east coast to cause the sea level rise, and that's the consensus by the scientists. So when we have the future prediction, our premise and assumption is as follows. We can say that we will maintain the current ice level as same. Of course, there can be a tipping point. You can have the endurance that to a certain point before changing your responses to some stress points. So if we have a tipping point at like 2050, then we can understand how much endurance we can enjoy before that time. Then that's about the sea level rise in Incheon area. So by that time, 2050, overall, the average increase of the sea rise would be about 40 millimeters, and Incheon will be experiencing the 20 millimeters of the sea rise. And we can understand why Incheon is affected by the melting rise, although it is very far away from either from the Arctic or Antarctic. But I can explain theoretically that we can understand that there is a gravity of water when they are in the ice form, but if the water is melt, they are spreading. The gravity is going away, and then it will just spread around to the other areas, to the very far areas, which is like the Korean peninsula as the straits where two sides are meeting with the melt ice in the form of water. So it happens to be in an area, so we can be affected more than any other cities because of the location where two forces are meeting together. So that's why we might be affected more than any other cities like Sydney and New York. Since we are at a forum, we have to be able to talk about what we can do in the future. So ignorance is a bliss maybe, but we know something is coming to us. Then if we do not do anything, that will be a worse case. Therefore, in the Paris Agreement, we decided to do something in order to curb down the temperature rise by up to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But nothing may have happened so far. We still feel the heat in summertime, and we are not seeing any consequences of such agreement. Then we have to do more about this. If not, we will have the further temperature increase in the future. Even children will understand this very simple theory. Now, this is global primary energy consumption by source. Historically speaking, the use of the coals and fossil fuels like the petroleum and other resources, we are using a lot of them, although they are the sources of the energy consumption. And by 2015, we also had the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius as a cap, but still the RE100 is quite not fully implemented. Still, we should have the alternative energy to be in use. And in order to make the globe green again, we have to be using more renewable resources, energies. But still, this is COVID period. We came down to the use of the energy consumption then we realized that there should be something we can do as human beings. That happened to be in a COVID period, but maybe we have to go back to the COVID period in terms of our attitude toward the nature. This is something that we want to expect for the future. So we know that we can do something for our predecessors and we also for our posteriors. But sometimes we can just have our own personal interpretations that we don't want to care, what is important. We just don't want to care about it. But we have to take care of our future and future children and next generation. It is very important to use tumblers instead of the plastic cups, but we have more things to do. So we have a lot of things that can be expected by the political leaders and business people. So as voters, we have to be able to choose the right leaders to change our destiny. Once again, I have to tell you that if you go back to, this end sign should have been deleted. But anyway, we have to revert this graph from the red color to blue, and we want to go to the blue side as we hope. Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful and insightful presentation. Mr. Lee Wan, he from COPRI, has given us the presentation regarding our future sea rise using scientific data. And it was very surprising to know that the Incheon's sea rise level can be higher than any other cities by 10%. Was very surprising. And now I'm going to give you the next presenter, Professor Kim Jong-sung of Seoul National University. He will be talking about the nature-based solution for climate crisis, national strategy of the blue carbon. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now it's early in the morning, and I am still thinking straight, which is a good thing. Now, I would like to first congratulate you on the opening of IIOF 2024. I understand that you all love the sea, but we are faced with a climate crisis. And I believe that it is high time for us to pull wisdom so that we can overcome the challenges. And I believe that is one of the reasons why you are here with us today. Today, I would like to focus my presentation on blue carbon, which is emerging as a solution to fight climate crisis. And over the past few years, we've been joking about, well, this summer will be the coolest out of the few past years. And I do believe that the oceans can provide us with a solution. So I would like to talk about that. So we started to conduct this research from 2017. It's been about 8 years. So I will first give you the motivation and the background, but be brief about the background because the previous speaker already talked about that. I will focus my presentation on the Korean blue carbon science and give you the key findings and also talk about our way forward. As you know, we are faced with a climate crisis. The previous speaker already talked about this, and a few years back, the global community declared that they will go carbon neutrality or carbon neutral by 2050. And as you can see here, net zero by 2050 is a global mission. And in the midterm, the countries have to submit their NDCs. And most of the advanced countries pledged to reduce CO2 emissions. So they're quite ambitious about their goals. Then what about Korea? The goal is that by 2030, we reduce CO2 by 40% against 2018. And this is a little bit shy compared to other countries. And as you know, what about the Ministry of Ocean and Fisheries? In 2021, the ministry unveiled its negative initiative. So you have, for instance, maritime energy, ports, and across these sectors, we have to cut carbon emissions. And what I would like to bring your attention to is here on the right, you see 1.36 million tons of sequestration, which is the sink, which means that blue carbon can serve as a sink. It will absorb carbon and it will store carbon. So I will give you more detail about that during my presentation. Now this is the background. So how much carbon is emitted, how much carbon is sinked, and now this is a 10-year average and the number will keep changing every year. Now we use fossil fuel and carbon coming out from fossil fuel will go to green carbon and blue carbon. And most of them will be split into green and blue carbon. So you have land and sea, it's about 50-50 in terms of ratio. However, if you look at green carbon, which is the land carbon, you have forest, you have land, and some people say that the cities will also absorb carbon. But anyways, compared to land or green carbon, we haven't studied that much about blue carbon. Now we have many marine habitats. Now when we first discussed the idea of blue carbon, we talked a lot about how plants can absorb carbon and how photosynthesis is used in the process. Now, as you can see on the slide, you have salt marsh. For instance, you will have intertidal zone, and you do have a lot of habitats there. And salt marsh will serve as a sink. And if you look at, in the case of subtropical regions, they are home to mangrove. And this is not the case in Korea. However, we do have mangrove as a sink. And you also have seagrass. Now, when you go to, for instance, the shorelines, you will see the seagrass forests, and these are blue carbon. And if you look at the global community, now carbon can be reduced by these three sinks: salt marsh, mangrove, and seagrass. But if you look at Korea, we do have another ecosystem that we can use, which is tidal flat. And people have a hard time understanding that because, tidal flat is just a flat with mud. However, now once you go to tidal flat, you will see that this is home to microalgae. And what they can do is they can store carbon, and then the sediments will actually stack here. And this really deserves our attention. And we need to study this as a potential blue carbon. Now you have 30, 0, or 40, and now 32, 0, 45. Now the size itself is quite small for salt marsh, mangrove, and seagrass. But how about tidal flat? You see that the size is very big. Now we have different species of plants, and you see now the size area. And of course, the larger the size area is, it will store more carbon. So as a blue carbon habitat, tidal flat needs to be recognized on the global stage as a potential sink. Now, back in 2009, we started to talk about blue carbon. It's about 10 years ago-ish. And at the time, IUCN released a special report on blue carbon. And at the time, they claimed, and the researchers claimed, that this is worth looking as a blue carbon. Then the global community started to recognize blue carbon and the power of blue carbon. And blue carbon started to gain traction. And back in 2017, Korea engaged in studies on blue carbon. So as I mentioned, this is our 8th year. And in Korea, well, this is how we study blue carbon. Of course, terminology is very important. Of course, I have been studying tidal flats for over 30 years, and I'm sure that you've heard of microalgae and photosynthesis and so on and so forth. And now, here we also study invertebrate. And here they eat microalgae, and they live on microalgae. But then because of climate change, now we started to pay more attention on carbon sink, which was a thankful movement or phenomenon because we have more to research now. Now, two perspectives matter when you study this. Now, biomass goes up, and with photosynthesis, the entire volume will go up. But then you have the dead bodies, which will be sequestrated, and we call that sediments. So you have the biomass and sediment sequestration. Well, when you combine the two, we call that carbon sink or carbon sequestration. And that would be the exact terminology. However, when we say 흡수 or absorb or store in Korean, people tend to interchangeably use the terminologies. Now, once a tree dies, then the tree will no longer be able to absorb carbon. However, if you look at the sea, you will have the sediment at the floor, the seabed, which means that they cannot really decompose the sediment. So you have to understand the difference between land and sea. Now I would like to give you more background about our study. So phase 1 was between 2017 to 2021. And at the time, you have the development of methods. At the time, we did not really know the methodology. So we worked on developing the methodology. And with methodology, we started building data. And we studied tidal flats nationwide, sometimes on a monthly basis, sometimes by season. And we have tidal flats all over the country. So we studied the level of sediment, and this received a lot of attention. And this is the result of the study. Now, here it says that carbon stock is about 48 million ton of CO2, and here it talks about sequestration level as well. So that was an annual figure. So here you have the numbers, and tidal flats can absorb CO2, which generates actually 110,000 to 200,000 cars a year, which means that by preserving the tidal flats well, once it is recognized as a blue carbon, then it can be used as a credit. So it equates to about 110,000 or 200,000 cars a year once we can trade this as a credit. So this received a lot of attention, and the Ministry of Ocean and Fisheries also started to recognize the sea as an important carbon sink. So in 2022, blue carbon was adopted as a national policy, which means that we need to study more. So we have to focus on the technology, and we need to come up with the engineering technology to be able to test the ideas. Now on the right, you see the potential candidates for blue carbon. It's not just the tidal flat, but also oyster reef, as well as the coral reef and the sediments. And these are some of the elements that we are researching. And from early 2000s, Living Shoreline has been an initiative that has been carried out around the world. And we want to design a K living shoreline and use it as a way to sequester carbon. And this is one of the studies that we are also conducting here in Korea. And this is quite complex, but 26 organizations are involved in this project, and we have about 500 researchers behind this. So it's a huge project. We want to analyze the mechanism behind blue carbon. And at the same time, what we want to do, we want to use the living shoreline techniques towards carbon neutrality to reduce carbon here in Korea. So we have green and blue, and we have here K living shoreline. So 3 subjects in total. And of course, I talked about the engineering technology, and technology matters. But at the end of the day, we need to have policies that can support these initiatives. So to reach net zero 2050, and also to be able to reach our NDC, we must have these initiatives in place. So we are working together with the policy making groups as well. Now, I believe that this slide is the most important slide that I want to show today. Now we have mangroves and salt marsh and seagrass for blue carbon. And on the right, here you see the detail. Now the international community requires these criteria for the habitat type to be recognized as a blue carbon. So it's a sort of requirement. And here it talks about large scale, which means that the scale matters. you have to have a large scale of greenhouse gas removals or emissions. And the second criteria would be long-term storage, which means that CO2 needs to be stored in a long term. Now, for mangrove, salt marsh, and seagrass, here it says yes, which means that, okay, we will recognize these 3 habitats as blue carbon. Number 3, the third criteria is carbon loss by anthropogenic impacts. It's more about the maintenance. And number 4 is a practical management to reduce emission. Now, the destroyed habitats are once restored, they must be able to reduce the emission properly. So that is criteria number 4. And once you meet these criteria, then you will be recognized as blue carbon. And these 3 habitats have been recognized as blue carbon because they really check all the criteria. Now, what you see here, you have benthic sediment and macroalgae and tidal flat as emerging blue carbon ecosystems. You have some question marks here. Of course, for microalgae, it ticks almost all the criteria. So macroalgae is most likely to become a blue carbon, but then there are other ocean ecosystems as well. For instance, coral reef, oyster reef, and phytoplankton and fish. But most of the criteria, as you can see here, are no. And no does not really mean no, they do not fit the criteria. It means that we haven't conducted enough studies yet. And you do have many question marks here, and we are now pursuing tidal flat. And once these question marks turn to yes, then IPCC can recognize tidal flat as a blue carbon. So we will have the scientific evidence to really meet the criteria. Now, once every thing becomes a yes, now we are conducting many studies on tidal flats, so I think that we are getting to the destination that we want to reach. And there is a paper that reviews the criteria for tidal flat, which is quite promising. And now, of course, this was subject to heavy debates because we have so many tidal flats, but then it's quite dynamic. What I mean by that, sometimes sediment will be like a few meters a day, and sometimes it is not to that level. But then in the long term, if you look at the West Sea, we say that well, this was born 8,000 years ago. So this has been existing for 7,000 to 8,000 years. So this means that it has been storing carbon for that long. And we need to prove that. So what they do is they core sediment to prove that. And here it's up to 10 meters. And what they do, they get the sample of the sediment, and you have to prove that carbon was stored here in a very stable manner, and we do have the data. So we do believe that we will get to the point that we want anytime soon. Now, we cannot just leave the tidal flats as it is to be recognized as a blue carbon. We have to maintain this, we have to preserve this, and we have to continue to do so for the global community to recognize this as a blue carbon. So we have carbon reduction and also carbon sequestration, which is different. And I talked about the 3 habitats before, which is recognized by the international community, and they are recognized as the reduction source for carbon. But, well, what they can do is they can have the carbon credit, and the credit can be traded on the international stage, which is a huge benefit. But now, if you look at Korea, well, Korea is also working very hard to restore the vegetation of the tidal flats. And going forward, we want to really turn this K living shore idea into reality. And as you know, K tidal flats have been registered on the UNESCO Heritage List, which means that we need to preserve this, just like Ramsar, and as a biodiversity area, we have to preserve this area to be recognized on the global stage. So we have to make sure that we do have the sites as marine protected area. So these are some of the initiatives that we are pursuing. So we can definitely say yes for practical management to reduce emission. So I do believe that we do meet this very criterion, the number 4. Then we will be all set to be recognized as a blue carbon. And then we can claim to the international community to recognize the Korean tidal flats as a blue carbon. And you have the West and the South Sea areas where we are conducting extensive research. Now, what we do here, we have, for instance, the microalgae, and for the salt marsh, what I say that it's a vegetation or a vegetative tidal flat, and if it's not salt marsh, then it will be non-vegetative tidal flat. Anyways, now once you start to plant some halophytes, then the vegetation will grow better. So now the methodology that we're using here is green living. Now we have a lot of destruction of salt marsh, and what we want to do, we want to revive that salt marsh with halophytes, so that in the near future we will be able to see more sediments building up there, and we will also see more carbon stored in there. Now we have Sacheon, Hwasong, and these are some of the studies that we conducted. And as you can see here, the vegetation grow well. And we don't just plant the vegetation. We make sure that we consider the chemical, the physical, as well as the sediment properties to make sure that they live well and they survive well. And I talked about the oyster reef before. And then you have the shell here, which will go through calcification, which means then it has C, carbon, in the shell. And we have to understand the physics here. Now you have the flow, it will go through calcification, and then at the end of the day, what will happen? We will have calcium carbonate in the shell, which will be stored in the shell. Now for marine animals, we are now studying the carbon mechanism of those animals. But then anyways, now what happens here in Korea is that the oyster shells are just being dumped, because we don't really understand the value of the shells, the oyster shells. But we want to add value to oyster shell. So what we do, blue living includes all the animals and plants in the ocean, and it's an umbrella term that we use to make sure that they can serve as carbon sink as well. Now, and they will settle over time. And what they can do is they can also prevent shore erosion. And at the same time, they will also create a shelter-like space. So what we do is we also conduct this blue living test bed study. And once you go to the sea, you will see breakwater as well as different tiles and so on and so forth. And those are man-made structures. And once you use concrete wall, what will happen is that you will have different types of plants or plant life sticking to the walls. So you will have like these tiny pores like on the walls, and you will have the plant life living on the walls. And what will happen here is that over time, the seaweed or marine algae will grow. So we want to focus on this, and we want to focus on this potential as well. And this is the soft living initiative that we are carrying out. So it's not just the blue carbon that we are focusing on, but we want to really grow more vegetation and more life in the ocean. So I do believe that Korea is one of the advanced countries studying this sector. We have, of course, the UK, Canada, and US, and China, and we want to conduct a joint research to be recognized as a blue carbon. Now, this is the 2030 NDC 2050 carbon neutrality scenario, and as you can see here, to reach that goal, we have a K-Blue Carbon National Strategy, which was released in 2023. So we have to reduce about 1 million tons by 2030. This is NDC. And of course, we have salt marsh, seagrass, tidal flat, oyster shell, marine forest on the slide. But the tidal flat, of course, is not yet recognized on the global stage, and oyster shell also. But we want to make sure that we continue on this track. And there are more countries really following suit. About 10 countries around the world are pursuing different ideas as blue carbon, such as tidal flat, and they're including these in their own NDCs. So of course, this requires more research, but in terms of policy and diplomacy, I think that we need to work with more countries around the world to make sure that these candidates are officially recognized as official blue carbon. And to do so, as you know well, we need more friends. So for instance, here I talked about the IUCN. We are working with IUCN to release a tidal flight special report. And when IUCN wants to recognize something, TFI matters. So TFI oversees a global greenhouse gas emission. And Mr. Enoki chairs TFI. We need to have more meetings with TFI so that our tidal flats are recognized as blue carbon. So we need to engage in multiple initiatives and activities going forward. Now we want to make sure that our tidal flats become recognized as an official blue carbon. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. You talked about how nature-based solution can be used for climate crisis, and you focused on the blue carbon ideas. So thank you very much for that.
해외 연사
Now, I'm going to give you the third presenter, who is an international speaker. I'm going to ask you now to use the receivers for the simultaneous interpretation if you need. So please check the channel for your language. Now, he has come all the way from Canada, so I'm going to give you now Professor Rashid Sumaila of UBC. He is going to give us the talk about the 3 things to abandon to preserve marine biodiversity under climate change. I'd like to welcome you to the podium.
A big round of applause. 여러분 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
Yeah, so I think I should do this, right?
Please welcome him again.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, it's such a pleasure to be with you. And first of all, I want to thank you all for coming, to the organizing committee for inviting me, to my 2 esteemed professors for doing an amazing work. I mean, the presentations were just wonderful. Thank you. You laid the foundation. Professor Sang, I have to make sure I don't mix the name. Professor Sang, you laid the foundation very well, the problems we are facing with climate change. And then Professor Seond came on and actually showed how our natural systems are not only victims, they can actually help us to deal with climate change. And I kind of appreciated that a lot. Now I'm going to bring the human dimension, how we, the people, can use our brains, knowing what we know, to be able to really start dealing with this. So that is my goal here. That's the title. So essentially, I'll be talking about 3 things I think we need to do as people in Korea and all over the world to lift ourselves to a level so we can live in harmony with nature, because that is what this is all about. So here we are. Why do I say that? If you look at this, even without climate change, our ocean systems, our oceans are in trouble. There's just too much fishing all over the world. The FAO, the UN FAO, actually estimates that about 1/3 of all fish stocks, commercial, not all animals in the ocean, we just know a bit more about the commercial, 1/3 of them are overfished. There are more scientific papers that say up to half of our fish stocks are in trouble. We take the big ones, the valuable fish we take, and then we go to the next one, and the next one. That's the fish in our marine food web that is there. And of course, we have pollution. Plastic goes into the ocean. There's one report that says that if we don't care, if we don't take care, by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Just think about that. That's the kind of thing we're doing. Then we have the oil spills, and then, of course, we have the big one, climate change, which is the topic of today. So lots of multiple stresses, and we need to do all that we can to really pull this back. Number one, we need to reduce emissions, which is the mitigation. We need to adapt, nature-based solutions, and we need to also deal with our own behavior and how we make decisions in order to deal with this. Yeah, so again, going back to my professors here, that I really enjoy your talks. The first part, the little rectangle you see there, is talking about the climate changes that you heard about. So if you are heating up the ocean, sea surface temperature is going up. If you are increasing salinity and acidity and reducing oxygen in the ocean, sea level rise, obviously the animals in the ocean are going to be affected. They will be victims, right? So you have that. This is a paper we published very early, 2011, where we looked at what happens when the chemistry and the physics of the ocean is changing. Obviously, it's going to affect us. We are all animals of chemistry and physics, right? I mean, without physics and chemistry, no people, no animals, no life. So that will affect the organisms in the ocean, which will then affect populations of animals, which can then lead on to communities, the habitats and things like that. And ultimately, it will affect us. I'm talking about fisheries specifically here, but all over. You all know how important the ocean is. It's 70% of the Earth's surface. I tell my students, I say, if you score 30% in your exam, and I can say that in this room, all of you here, none of you were scoring 30% in their exam. Otherwise, you won't be in this room, right? So if we mess up 70% of the Earth surface, we will be in trouble, right? And so, and then in a year, we take about 120,000 tons of fish out of the ocean each year, legally and illegally. That is a lot of food, a lot of biomass. Today in the breakfast, I had those little small mackerels, right? Beautiful, goes very well with the breakfast. 120,000 of that tons is taken out. And if you convert that to mature cows, that's also about 120 mature cows we pull out of the ocean each year. I call them fish cows, right? If you assume 1 ton is the weight of a mature cow. And that is a lot of jobs, a lot of income. So this is about people as well as about the ecosystem. That is the direction from there to there. But you see, I have these 2 white arrows going backwards. The natural system is not only a victim. We can also treat it in a way that it will help us mitigate and help us adapt to climate change. That is nature-based solution, essentially. How you fish, what you take, how you deal with the habitats. Do you knock off the sea mounts when you fish? All that also matters. Do you overfish? Do you use too much carbon to chase fish that are scarce in the ocean? That means you are pumping out more CO2 than you really need to, right? All that aggravates the problem. So the way we deal with the ocean also is important, not only the impact of climate change. So in this paper, I just thought I should show you some scientific work. We did a paper after the Paris Agreement, which was mentioned. And after that, President Trump came in and pulled out of the climate agreement. So I pulled together my team and said, let's do a study to show how, the world dealing with climate change, what will be the benefits. And actually, we set up the model that way. You can see the key variables. We looked at the biomass of fish. If we are to remain within 1.5 or 2, even 2 degrees, how will the fish in the ocean do? How will they do? And I tell you, they will do very well. Over 75% of country waters will have more fish if we deal with climate change than not. And if you have more fish, there are lots of good things that come. Carbon sequestration is one of them. I'll come to that. We'll get more food if we do it sustainably. We'll get food forever, and I'll come back to the idea of food forever later. So we calculated how will that deal with the fish? How much fish can we catch? How will that affect the revenue that our fishers get out of the fishing throughout the world? And also, seafood workers through the fish value chain, how will they do? And finally, households. If you insist on eating the same quantity and quality of fish under different scenarios of climate change, how much more will you have to pay? And we looked at only the top 10 species that are caught in the world, and we found that almost $20 billion will all have to pay more under severe climate change just for those 10 species, right? So there are real economic costs all over. So the paper, you can check it out. The details I cannot tell you here, but at least you get the picture. And in there we have nice graphs like this that tell you what happens to the biomass, what happens to the catch, what happens to the revenue, the household income, and fish workers. I just showed a few of them. One key thing we see is that, and this is a moral thing for developed countries like Korea, right? I mean, most of the pain, most of the losses from climate change to fishes is going to happen in the tropics, in the middle of the earth, if you want, in the developing world, in the tropical part of the world. And they do not pump out as much CO2 per capita as we do in the north, right, in the rich parts of the world. But they are going to suffer more, so there is a moral and ethical thing. Is it fair to pump out all this CO2 for our high quality of life and let the people who really need the fish lose their fish? That is a food for thought for all of us. And that's what I'm saying. When the fish are in trouble, people are in trouble. That picture you see there, this guy is saying, is that all the shrimp I get? And the woman here, that is an example of an environmental refugee. People forced to leave their coastal villages because there's no fish. How is that? I was in Malaysia a year or two ago. We went to a coast in, was it in Penang? And there's a lady trying to sell fish at the coast. I one day took out my camera to snap, and I couldn't. The fish were just little things, very pathetic, few. And this poor woman, that's what she does to feed her family. So this has huge human consequences. And you go to West Africa, people are forced to migrate, try to get to Europe, right? Because the fish is gone. So this is not going to stay in these poor parts of the world. It will reach all of us. We got to deal with it. So this is my beautiful book. This is my COVID book. And this declines. You saw in the first picture all the climate change and so on. My colleague, Daniel Pauli, at our center, he actually wrote a book, and we didn't actually talk about it. He wrote his book with the title Vanishing Fish. And then I wrote mine, and I called it Infinity Fish, you know. So he sees all the decline and is worried, so he writes. And I say, look, if we get our act together, if we do the right thing, we can bring back our fish, and it can continue to give us benefits throughout time, not only for us, but our children, grandchildren, granddaughters, grandsons, right, into the future. Because fish is renewable. And I even made the crazy statement that fish is actually more valuable than diamond. And the whole room just jumps. Why do I say that? You can continue to take fish year in, year out, right? If you manage it well, forever. And anything that gives you benefit, even if it is small, through time, you sum it over time to infinity, you get infinity benefit. Therefore, infinity fish. Diamond is not forever. Don't let them trick you, the marketeers. If you dig 1 ton of diamond today, you are never going to go back and dig that 1 ton in your lifetime. It's not forever. And we can debate that and discuss that. So that's the topic of this book, and it's very inspirational. And the whole idea is our goal, every generation's goal should be to manage our fisheries, deal with climate change, all the pressures, such that we're able to pass on a healthy ocean teeming with life to our children and grandchildren, so that they too can have the opportunity and the option to do the same. You get the point. You don't take away that option from them. If they take away, that's their issue. I do my best. I pass a good ocean to you because it's our common heritage. And that's the theme of the book, Infinity Fish. And all this together, these are my 3 points here. I think that if we are going to achieve infinity fish, get away from vanishing fish, we need to abandon the notion that we, the people, have the right to take everything, everywhere, all at once. You get the beat? How many of you know where this title came from? Everything, not everything, everywhere, all at once. It's the title of a movie, actually. It's Asian Americans, yeah, a beautiful movie. I was watching it and I said, this thing, when it comes to the environment, this cannot be what you want. Take everything, everywhere, all at once. It should be not everything, not everywhere, not all at once. We have to get to that level. Otherwise, we destroy our beautiful natural system. So these are the 3 things, and I'll go into them very quickly and then talk about them. So let's take the not everything all at once. This is about intergenerational equity. People tell me, Rashid, why do you care about sustainable fisheries? Our kids may be able to, may like to eat only jellyfish. They tell me, so you eat all the tuna, all the salmon and cod and leave jellyfish for your kids and grandchildren? No, that's too self-serving. Come on. Why not give them all and they make their choice? If they choose to eat jellyfish, good for them. You know? So this is a deep concept from economics, a concept of discounting. And this is a quote from a person I call a controversial guy. Some of you may know him. My European friends say, there are many things he did you don't want to quote at all. But this one I thought was quite a good one. He says, egoism is the notion that we, the current people, anything close to us is large and weighty, and anything far away from us loses its weight and value. And I think this is a general human tendency. For example, in this room today, for most of us, this is the most important space in the world today because we are here. All right, I get that. But if you let that egoism rule your life, you'll be in trouble, because that means you want to load things. Grab, 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 take, and you are not thinking about tomorrow or the future. So we have to temper that. And in economics, we use the concept of discounting to try to get hold of this. By the way, I'm an economist. I call myself an interdisciplinary oceans and fisheries economist. I work with interdisciplinary teams like these beautiful, great professors here to kind of work together and solve a problem. Not a single discipline can do it. So that's our concept here. And if you look at this, I think to let you see how powerful this, we use this to make decisions, policy. Let's say you have a constant flow of benefits that go, you have 1 unit, this can be 1 trillion or $1, depending on what you're looking at. And you have $1 or $1 billion coming to you from something each year, okay? That's a constant flow. We call that current value. Today you get 1 billion. In 5 years you get 1 billion. In 10 years you get 1 billion, and it goes. If you discount that, which is what we do in all our economic models, because $1 to you today is more valuable than the same dollar to you in 10 years, right? Everybody agrees here. You want to have your dollar today rather than in 10 years, right? Why? Because you can do a lot with it. You can use it to educate yourself and get more value, or you can invest it, and so on and so forth. Hey, who knows? You may not even be here tomorrow, right? So give me my benefit. So that's the idea. And if you discount at 8%, that is how this constant flow will turn out. By 100 years, there's almost nothing, right? The value of the fish we ate today or this week has no value to Koreans who were here 100 years ago, right? That's what this thing says. So to them, our fish now is not valuable. But clearly to us today, who ate fish, I took mackerel today, is valuable, right? So that is the thing discounting does. It puts more weight on the current generation than the future. So if you take the area under that discounted curve, if you take the area under this for 20 years, if you assume there are 5 generations of 20 years, you fish for 20 years and you retire, if you do that and you take the area under them, this is what you get. So you see that we put a lot of weight on today, on the first generation, and then let's wait for the second until there's almost nothing. So if I ask you now, if you use this to design policy, fisheries policy or forestry, any of the things we do, is this going to be fair to future generations? Most people say, no, this is not fair. No, this is not fair. But then I realized, I was playing with this as we do academics, I was playing with this and I realized the main reason this is not fair is that we use this for our policies and therefore we put very little weight on the future generation. That's because we use what I call the discounting clock of the current generation. So I said, maybe if we discount every person's fish as their fish, that might do the job. And indeed, that does the job. So you discount your fish for 20 years, you get off, your son or daughter comes in, she starts discounting, for another 20 years she goes, another one comes, and then it is actually fair. So the problem is we count future generation fish as our fish, and that is where the problem comes. So I use this to develop a new way to do discounting called intergenerational discounting. These are 2 foundational papers I published, one by myself, the beginning idea, and then Carl Waters, who is a big ecologist, was so excited, joined me, and we did this. I won't be able to tell you much about this, and it's also in the book, in the Infinity Fish book, so you can check it out. But the whole thing is, we just made sure that we are counting every generation's fish as their fish. This is a simple example in the first paper where we did some modeling. You have Icelandic fishing system. You take some of the effort out to rebuild the stock so that you can get a sustainable harvest. And we did the conventional approach versus our approach. And if you value it, doing what economists do today, you will not rebuild the stock. You say, no, it doesn't make sense. But if you count future generations' fish as their fish, you will actually see that it's valuable to rebuild your stock. So that is the main message. So the bottom line here is that not everything, not all at once. So you have to think about the future generations like indigenous people do actually. Indigenous people have talked about managing natural resources for 7 generations, and the concept is built into that. So, not all at once. Now, let's go to not everything. That will be short. I'm looking at the time. So, this is biodiversity justice, not everything. And here I'm talking specifically about special fish species in the deep sea, right? The deep sea, they live very long and it's very dark. There's no sunlight much. There's no food, so they're very economical animals. Some of them live for long, over 100 years. I mean, you think about Greenland sharks, they live up to 400 years. You know, so I say that anything that can live, as long as your grandmother or grandfather, just leave them alone. So we have to live to a stage where we say we don't touch these things, because if we do, we are mining them and messing up our ecosystem. Then there's a big thing happening now. People want to go down 2,000 meters to take out minerals, and there are many arguments for and against. We had a paper recently where we looked at this. But from my personal perspective, these things are not 2,000 meters away for nothing. They are kept away by nature because they are so delicate. Think about a mango. You are walking under a mango, it's ripe, it falls on you. It's almost begging you, eat me, please, right? That is meant to be eaten, but something hidden thousands of delicate ecosystems, but some of us want to go in. And there's no knowledge to do this. At least there should be a moratorium so we understand best what is going on. So that is not everything, very quickly. And then, not everywhere. This is about so many things, actually, and it connects to the 2 earlier lectures. There are things we shouldn't touch. If you want carbon sequestration from what? Seagrass, then you better treat it carefully, right? And so on and so forth. And it's also economics, this one. And it is about fishing in the high seas. How many of you all know the country EEZ, country waters, exclusive economic zones, and the high seas, 200 nautical miles away from the coast. And we are fishing more then because of the need. We depleted our systems. And a number of us have come up with papers where we are arguing that actually, if you look, the main things we catch are tunas, and they go in and out of the system. And if we're patient, we'll catch them within EEZ. And these are just numbers to show you. We take very little out of the high seas in total, out of the high seas. And so we can just wait for them. When they come in, we catch them. That is good for the economics. You don't go roaming to test of the ocean to search for things. It's good for climate change. You don't pop too much CO2. They almost jump into your boat. It's good for equity because only big countries, about 8 of them, I think Korea is one of them, one of the big nations fishing in the high seas. And the high seas is supposed to be owned by all people in the world. So if you leave them alone, small countries that really need the food. I was at breakfast today. The variety is unbelievable. There's no problem with food in Korea. Or is there? Can anyone knock me back? So we did this, and we came up, and it's not only my group, Chris Costello's group also looked at this, and we came to the same conclusion. We said that to make the ocean more resilient, to deal with climate change, to make it more equitable, so smaller countries can also get a share of this, which is good for all of us, also in the rich world, because when you have instability in 80% of the world, don't think we are going to be on the high mountain safe. No, these things do come together. We have one world. And it's good for, I said the economy is good for climate, it's good for biodiversity, of course. The fish and the animals can hide in the high seas. When it's too dense, they come in and we catch them. So this is a simple simulation thing that one of my postdoc, I think it's Louise there, actually. She's from Malaysia, did this one. And so you have the ocean, you close the high seas to fishing, and you are fishing here. And then when you do that, normally when you do that, the fish in the high seas become more, everything being equal. And when they are dense enough, oh gosh, what happened? When they are dense enough, my simulation is not working. When they are dense enough, they will just jump into the EEZ and you can catch them cheaply. So that is the not everywhere. We should be able to have parts of the ocean that we, even though we can, we say no, we won't, because it's not good for fish, and ultimately it will not be good for us. It will make the ocean less resilient to climate change, which is a problem. And so that is not everything, not everywhere, not all at once. And this not everywhere, the high seas. We did a paper, actually, I don't know whether you've seen it, where I spent summer at Oxford, and me and Alex Rogers worked on this. He's the scientist and I'm the economist. And we estimated the value, the carbon value of animals in the high seas who go up and down and take carbon down there into the ocean and hide it, so up and down. And we calculated the annual benefit of the nature-based solution, hiding carbon, and we catching the fish and eating. We calculated the value of the two, and you know what? The carbon value was 10 times the fish catch value. So that's the kind of thing we are talking about. So there are things we need to do, but we have to be at a higher level. When I say we human beings, we have to say, like my grandfather used to tell us, he used to say that, when I was young, we used to play soccer. I could play soccer. Do you believe it? I used to play soccer, man. In Nigeria, people play soccer all the time. So I could take the ball through your leg like this. So we are playing and jumping, and my grandfather will be sitting there and say, "You guys, why? Just because you can knock the walls and the floor, and it doesn't mean you should do it. It doesn't mean you should do it." He said, "You should walk on earth as if it feels pain." That's my grandfather. I'm sure you all have your own granny tales, right? Walk on earth as if it feels pain. And later I realized this was very powerful. It's about human beings relating to other things, relating to human beings, because if you really take that to heart, you treat every human being fairly, no matter how they look, whether woman or boy, whatever, right? So I think it's a key to life that my grandfather told us without actually giving us a big lecture. So walk on earth as if it feels pain means that there are things we should choose not to do, even though we can do them. You get it? And I think that is the big kind of thing we need to have in order to deal with this vanishing thing, all the destruction going on. We need that in order to deal with policy, because some of our policies actually aggravate our problems. One of them is harmful fishery subsidies. We give fishing sector fuel subsidies, so they burn more fuel and aggravate climate change. And they catch the fish too much, so we have less fish tomorrow, right? So my group, we spent about 20 years dealing with this. We created a global database, which the WTO actually uses. I gave lectures to Korean scientists about this years ago. And this paper, it also thought we need to be interdisciplinary. And this paper is a good example. The WTO was going to negotiate for how to deal with this. And actually, they got an agreement in June 2022, I think. Yeah, Korea signed on that. Congratulations, And so we have an agreement to start dealing with this. But what I did as a scientist who is interdisciplinary, I put together a team of about 300 scientists from all over the world, all continents, almost all countries. And we wrote a letter to Science, which was published, and we got it published. It was so powerful, the Director General of the WTO made this occasion for me to hand the letter to her. And we did that. She made copies for all ambassadors of the UN. This is what I call interdisciplinary action-based science. And we need more of that to be able to make our oceans and our communities resilient, not only against climate change, but also all the other pressures that are being imposed on the ocean and on the environment generally for our own good, so that we can achieve infinity fish, infinity ocean, infinity biodiversity, and therefore infinity life. Thank you very much. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your great contribution and expertise for today's forum. 네, 감사합니다. 라시드 스말라 교수님께서 이 세 번째 연사로
As the third speaker, Professor Rashid gave us the talk about the importance of the protection of the ecosystem and what should be abandoned as the people who are experiencing it and for the sake of our next generations. And you have heard three presentations about the climate change and the sea level management. It is very important to explore ways of possibilities to reduce the impact on the climate change. And as you have recalled, we have our presentations regarding the polar issues and how we can cope with this melting of ice caps. And also we have heard from other speakers about what we can do now in order to do the contribution to the globe once we know the important impact. And also Professor Kim Jong-sung of Seoul National University continued to talk about the carbon sink and also the importance of understanding the sequestration of carbon. He has given us also the usage and strategies for the blue carbon that is heated discussion nowadays. So we were very much in the learning about the strategies. So with all these three speakers back, we are ready to have further discussions in the general discussion. We will now have our moderator and the three speakers on the stage again. Professor Nam Sung-hyun will be the moderator for this general discussion. Please give him a big hand while he's coming onto the stage. I'd like to now also invite all the speakers back onto the stage, Professor Lee, Professor Kim, and also Professor Usipusmala from the UBC, please.
this stage. 네, 함께 자리해 주십시오. 고맙습니다.
Thank you so much. Regarding the marine climate and climate change, we can have deep discussions, and I'm looking forward to having great insights from them. Thank you very much.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm professor at the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Seoul National University, where I research natural science centered on ocean observation. My name is Nam Sung-hyun. It's a pleasure to meet you all. First and foremost, I congratulate you on the hosting of the 5th IIOF, which, as the largest ocean forum in the metropolitan area, provides an opportunity to build a sustainable future of Korea's maritime industry. And I would like to express my gratitude to Minister Kang Do-hyung of Oceans and Fisheries, Mayor Yoo Jung-bok of Incheon, and President Lee Kyung-gyu of IPA and other officials for the opportunity to be here. And before we begin the discussion, I would like to thank the speakers as well. We had principal research scientist Lee Won-sang from Kopri and Mr. Kim Jong-sung from the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences, and also Professor Rashid Usif Sumalia. So this is the second time I'm here at IIOF. Last year, I gave a lecture on climate crisis and marine environment at the Safety Ocean session, and I was able to see at the time the interest of many people in the changing marine environment due to the global climate crisis that is worsening day by day. And now I am moderating session 5, which makes it more meaningful. And according to WMO's State of the Global Climate 2023, released in March, the global average surface temperature measured last year was the highest in the 174 years since weather observation began, and the average global sea surface temperature was also the highest on record. And what particularly deserves our attention is that, as Mr. Lee showed us before, is that the ocean has actually a higher specific heat and mass than the atmosphere. and higher heat capacity, meaning that once the ocean heats up, it doesn't cool down easily. So this creates new challenges as the ecosystem in the ocean, which is our home and a valuable asset that we need to pass on to the future generation, are rapidly changing. So in this session, which is the session of ocean environment and climate, I would like to invite experts to discuss the various issues related to the marine environment and climate in the context of the unpredictable climate crisis, and also to explore ways to improve them. And before we get into the discussion, I would like to again introduce our panelists. First and foremost, this speaker talked about the rapid marine and polar environmental changes and sea level rise due to global warming. Mr. Iwon Sang, who's a principal research scientist at COPRI. Welcome. And we are also joined by the second speaker, who talked about NBS for climate crisis, national strategy of the blue carbon. We are joined by Mr. Kim Jong-sung, who is a professor at SNU, Seoul National University. Last but not least, the third speaker talked about the 3 things to abandon to preserve marine biodiversity under climate change. We're joined by Professor Rashid Usif Smaila of University of British Columbia. Welcome. So I will first ask questions before we open the floor. I would like to ask a few questions to the speakers, and then I will give you the questions first and then listen to the answers.
Now to Professor Lee, I have the following questions. So in your presentation, you said that the ice sheets are the biggest obstacle to accurately predict future sea level rise. So I'd like to ask, why do you think that? So why is ice sheet the biggest obstacle? And then the next question. If the average sea level rising is only about a few millimeters per year, not meters or tens of centimeters, why do you think it is a big problem still? So many people would want to know why such a small change would be a big problem down the road. Third question. You talked about the Arctic sea ice with the pictures. So that's the Arctic area, which is different from Antarctic. Arctic is actually always frozen. The sea ice is melting very quickly. So is the melting Arctic sea ice having no impact on the sea level rise? That's the third question. And fourth question is as follows. Why is sea level rise around Korea faster than the global average? I know that you have explained this a little bit, but would you elaborate on that? Why Korea should experience faster sea level rise?
4개씩이나 주셔가지고 지금 다 기억할 수
Well, thank you very much. You have given me 4 questions, not 3. So I have to take a note of them. So let me answer those questions now. The number 1 question is as follows. Actually, you have to have a further understanding about the conditions of the polar areas in order to understand the future impact more. The first and basic fundamental understanding is that because of the lack of the information about the polar areas, and also because of the lack of the very accurate and complex model to predict the certainty level in the future, we do not have the right information as a background. So with all this information available to us, policy making should be made in a correct manner. And that's the purpose of doing these researches. But even if we have the perfect model, if the input is very little or not trustworthy, we cannot guarantee the quality of the output. Therefore, we should visit the polar areas to get those elements that we haven't had thus far. Another thing is that we have to have better understanding about the physical theories that we didn't know before. So we should have the correlation made in between the input and output for the new physical models. Without visiting there and observing with our own eyes, we cannot set the right rule in place. We know some, but we do not know what's coming newly. For example, if we have the 10% or 20% improvement of the model quality, that is because of the actual observation of the polar areas. So all these new findings will be reflected onto the model estimation. So in order to improve our accuracy, we need to study more about the ice sheets. That's why it is important to know more about the ice sheets. The most frequent questions I got is that we have only a very small amount of sea rising. It's like the part of a just fish eyes. Why do we have to care about it? It's 10,000 years or 2,000 years, 20,000 years after. Why do we have to care now? That's my frequent question. But if you look at the graphs here, it's a extreme sea level event once in 100 years. For example, the willows, the abundance of the sea level is experienced. And even if it is once in 100 years, if you see some kind of aggravation, for example, the water coming into the land, then you can have set the base differently now. And also we are getting the reports about the extreme weathers all across the world. Just roughly speaking, it's about 10 centimeters of sea rise afterwards. We can also have the tsunami of the sea areas and coastal areas that can be affected. We also have the 1 centimeter of sea level rise. We can also experience a retreat of the coastline by 1 meter. And that's a very simple rule to remember. But for example, by 2050, if we have the 4 centimeters of rise of the sea level because of the ice melt from the polar areas, we can have additionally have the heat expansion. It can double the amount. If it is 8 centimeters, so these coastal areas of Incheon city will have the retreat by about 8 meters. So if I can explain it in a sea level way, we will lose all the tidal land, and also it will be a loss of the great amount of territory. With the melting ice from the polar areas, the sea rise will be made. That's the conventional concept. This is something I just brought now. This is a canned coffee, and we had a lot of water in here, and temperature was going up, and then water was just expanded a bit. It didn't change inside this can, but in the water, actually, you can have the expansion of the areas. Therefore, it's a little bit of the increase of the sea level, and then this impact is minimal if it is only because of the heat expansion. And do we have higher sea level than other countries? And it's because of the heat expansion as well. And I believe that Professor Kim will be explaining about this more. As mentioned, because of the melt ice, as water goes up, and then we can lose the gravity as mentioned, and then the water should be gathered together at one point. Korea is far distanced because of the location. It can, however, be affected by the melt ice from the Greenland. And then the expectation is that we can see the retreat of all the coastlines in many other areas. It's quite formidable. What is more formidable is that the time that we experience that will be accelerated. Maybe we can experience it earlier than previously predicted. With all these factors together, the situation will be aggravated with all these additional factors. Thank you very much for answering all these 4 questions that were raised in one question and answer. Also, in your answer, the water temperature increase is bigger than other areas with experiencing the heat expansion, which is also higher than others, and also water is coming down from the polar areas when the ice is melt, and Korea is the location where all the water is being amassed. With the presentation by Professor Lee Won-sang, we can understand how grave the situation is and will be, and especially the sea level rise will be one of the examples that we should be concerned about. In order to prevent it from happening, carbon footprint should be minimized. That's the most important thing. And also the carbon sequestration and absorption should be maximized. At the same time, the nature-based solutions can be given from the nature. So that's the blue carbon he talked about. So I would like to ask some questions, Professor Kim, as well. So that likewise, I'd like to pour all the questions all at the same time.
아주
So maybe this is because I have no knowledge about what you presented. So now carbon can be absorbed by the ocean, but then once it is released back into the atmosphere, then we cannot call it blue carbon. And you talked about the sediments, and then I believe that matters. But then you give us the idea of tidal flat. And would tidal flat store carbon to an enough level? Maybe it's not sufficient enough. I would like to ask that question to you. And regarding climate crisis, you said that we are getting more heat waves, and we also have flood in the Yangtze River area. At the same time, well, we do see more intense weather extremities, just like typhoons. Now that will actually aggravate the rising sea level. It will result in more typhoons, and we will need to have more infrastructure, such as, for instance, to prevent flooding. So we will need a stronger breakwater and so on and so forth. But then you talked about blue carbon. Of course, we also need to work on that as well. So how can we strike a balance between these two? So in terms of infrastructure and facility building on the shoreline, and at the same time, we will also need to preserve blue carbon as well as the natural ecosystem. So maybe striking the two, the balance between the two would be of essence, and how can we achieve that? That is my question to you. Thank you very much for the good questions. So I will give you the answer first. So yes, once it is absorbed and then it is released back, it cannot be blue carbon. But then from the perspective of blue carbon, as I mentioned, now the exact terminology would be storage, and then you have absorption, and then you have sedimentation. And what we have forest as one of the key carbon stock. And if you think of pine trees, they will grow and they will absorb carbon. And after 10 years, the pace will accelerate. And after 30 years, the pace will sort of stop because it will stop growing. We have giant trees here in Korea, but then if you look at the US, Canada, they grow up to 100 meters. But then after they reach a certain height, instead of growing or becoming taller, they will lose their photosynthesis capacity, which means that they will start absorbing less carbon. And at the end of the day, the figure can become negative. And once they reach that point, pine trees will no longer be blue carbon, which means that we need to reach an agreement in terms of what we need to do. So after 3 to 50 years, what they do is they will cut trees and they will plant new trees. So of course, science matters. And science does not lie. However, how are we going to develop good policies and reach a global agreement would be of essence. Now going back to blue carbon. Now it absorbs small and the sedimentation level is higher. And I talked about, for instance, halophytes. And salt marsh are being recognized as a blue carbon. And now if you think of, for instance, reed, they will at least live for 70 to 80 years, 70 to 80 years, and sometimes up to 1,000 years. And the root keeps absorbing carbon, but then the biomass on the surface, they will die and they will deposit. But then they will keep absorbing a certain amount of carbon. Now, as for halophytes, the entire carbon stock, if you were to add absorption to sedimentation, absorption is about 2%. So 98% will actually become sedimented. So I gave you the criteria of blue carbon. There were about 4 to 5 criteria. But then if you look at the long-term fixed basis, it's about 100 years. And that's a sort of international consensus. So we have to prove that you can store it for 100 years. So I told you how we core the sediments so that we can prove that for at least 100 years, the tidal flats did store carbon. So sediment is of essence. But then let's say that it was fixed for some time, but then sometimes what we do, we will reclaim the land. And what happens, the tidal flats become exposed. And it will become drier. Then carbon will be released back. And what we do, we dredge the ports a lot. So with dredging, what happens is that the sediments will be dug down. And that's happening in the coast and the shoreline, even in Korea. And what will happen is that the carbon will be released back in the atmosphere. And if that happens, we will not be recognized as a blue carbon. Now let's say that there was a wildfire and the trees burnt down. What happens is that the carbon will be released back in the atmosphere. We can actually equate the two. So of course it would be great if the nature can absorb carbon to a certain level. However, we have to think about disasters such as natural disasters, and that is why we need to come up with the right policies. But then, to prevent natural disasters, we need at least minimum human activities. For instance, I talked about the breakwater. We could, of course, build some infrastructure like that. But then when we did not fully know the value of tidal flats, we reclaimed tidal flats to turn into agricultural land and also to turn into industrial complex. So that's what we used to do during industrialization. So we lost about half of the tidal flat in Korea. But then they serve as the buffer zone. So we have to understand the value of salt marsh and tidal flat. We have to make sure that we preserve them, we maintain them well. And by doing so, I believe that we can reduce the building of the seawalls. So by building breakwater, maybe we can minimize some short-term harmful effect, but in the long term, like when you think of maybe controlling temperature and maybe absorbing carbon, we will lose that capacity. So I think that NBS is the answer. We have to go with NBS so that we can maybe build less breakwater and preserve more ecosystems such as tidal flats. And blue, green, and soft living are the K models that we are pursuing, and they're NBS. So we have to focus on those ideas, and I think that we need to really spread those ideas on the global level. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for the answers. Yes. So yes, you talked about climate crisis. And with climate crisis, of course, it's damaging the environment and also people. And we feel the emergency. But it's not just about the climate crisis that we need to think about. We also have some fish stock issues. And of course, Professor Rashid talked about that. So I would like to ask a few questions to Professor Rashid.
This might be also another foolish question. You know, the fish stocks are always generated, and if the stock is caught less than they are producing, we can expect that the amount of stock will be increasing over time. Don't you think so? Next, even if we were to reduce fishing, if, for example, the number of the top predators in the food chain is there in the marine ecosystem, they will just prey on the small fish, then won't the fish stocks decrease anyway, even without the intervention by human beings? And also, next, you talked about we have to avoid three things: not everywhere, not every time, not all at once. Regarding that suggestion, we know that there are a lot of severe threats on the climate change. So can we manage fish stocks in a sustainable manner in this regard? And if we can, how is the question? Thank you very much for your answer now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. There's no stupid question, okay? All questions are great because they make us think, so thank you. Yeah, so your first thing is fish is renewable. That's true. And if you have overfished already and you pull back and reduce fishing, the fish is likely to come back. It's almost all our models show that, except if you have actually damaged the system so much so that the fish cannot. But generally, nature is good. Nature comes back. So yes, you can rebuild your stocks essentially by reducing your take. It's almost like your money in a bank account, right? I mean, you put a deposit. If you put $1,000 in the account, you have interest rate of 5%. Each year you get 5% more, right? And if you take only the 5% year in, year out, then your deposit is intact. It keeps giving you 5% each year. You can think of fish like that. But if you decide to take 10%, when your interest is 5%, which is like the growth of the fish, then you are depleted. Your account, very soon you go to the bank and they tell you have no penny left, right? So that's the same kind of thing. Less will give you more, up to some point, of course, for fish. Now, predators, fish. Some fish eat other fish. In fact, some fish are cannibalistic. They eat their young. Hake in Namibia, they enjoy eating their babies, actually. So they make lots of them so they can feed, and there will still be some left, right? So yes, that is an issue. But you know what? What I usually tell people, and we have that debate a lot in Canada, is, oh, the seals are eating all our fish and the whales and so on. What I tell them is, nature actually knows how to deal with itself. If you leave the fish, the ocean alone, the seals and the salmon and the other things, they will find their own balance, actually. That's why we have natural systems thriving. You have carrying capacity. So they eat, and you get to a balance where the little fish know how to hide away from the seals enough, right? So that nature will take care of itself. The problem is when we go in and interfere with nature, right? For our needs, and you can't blame us. We just need to do it carefully, like walking on earth. As if it feels pain, you take the fish, being thoughtful of how it can continue doing that, not to knock it off and just take what you need today. So that is your second question. Animals will know how to deal with themselves. They'll find their own balance. Then you talk about the severe threat from climate change, and this is a big issue, right? In that kind of environment, can we even think about sustainable fisheries? And it's really a good question and a difficult one, because one could say, for example, because the climate change is going to be severe, let's empty the ocean, let's eat all the fish today, right? That could be one option, if you're thinking. But then many of us will say, because climate change is coming, what we need to do is to be more cautious, more careful, do the best we can. You know, usually in life, what do? There are things you can control and things that you cannot control, right? And the sensible way to go is to control the things you can control as best as you can, so that when you are hit by the things that you cannot control, at least you'll be in a better position to deal with it, right? So I think that is the whole philosophy here. Think about COVID. When COVID came, those of us who had pre-existing conditions were more in danger. If you're already and have health issues, you get hit by it, you go faster than somebody who is in a good state. And that should be the aim for our ecosystem. Put them in the best condition we can, and then when the madness hits, they will be able at least to resist. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. 네,
Yes, thank you very much for the answers. We are actually behind schedule, but then since we began late, maybe we can entertain a few questions. I asked my questions. Maybe we can open the floor to entertain a few questions. Do we have any questions? Yes, in the back. Yes. Yes, hello. I'm from the supporters team of IIOF. I have a question to Mr. Lee.
When the Arctic Sea is melt, we can use the area for the logistics. We can move the cargoes. So about 2 years ago, we had the new ideas like this. As a researcher, what do you think about this new idea of using the lane? And do you really think that this is possible? And if that happens, if we can have the logistics with the cargoes, will it benefit us as laymen, just regular people, or is it harming us, general public? Well, thank you very much for your question. Actually, I'm an expert in Antarctic, not Arctic. So for the Arctic, I know a little bit more than just regular people. And if the situation continues, the sea lane is expanding bit by bit, and also within several in the summers, they say that the whole ice sheet will be gone and they will be open for the transportation. So Ministry of the Foreign Oceans and Fisheries is also very much interested in that, and also many people are actually researching on the possibility of using that land. Even if the lane is opened, I know that the islets are just floating in the water, and also icebreakers at ships should be increased in number. Two more things. As for the environment, we call it Southscape. If the lane is frequently used by the ships, noise will be felt, which is a great harm to the animals there. So for the animals to live, ships should not be transporting there. But people say that the crisis is another side of opportunity. So what we can expect as opportunity is that when we have the petroleum oil that we have to deplete, now we can use the sea lane as a new opportunity for the ships, for the logistics and the economy. So we have to have a good balance between these economics of the situation and environment as policymakers. It's not about Korea only either. It's all about the whole world. So we should have a lot of mechanism to discuss these matters. And in those mechanisms that are available, we have to let the policymakers do the right thing in terms of their decisions. All other factors should be considered together. So we can ask these policymakers to have the right choice based on all the findings made scientifically. As for the Arctics, there are a lot of variabilities, and we have a lot that we should keep an eye on them. Thank you.
감사드립니다.
Yes, thank you very much for the question and answer. Do we have more questions? Yes, over there. Yes. Good morning. My name is Park Sang-won from the Port Authority. I have two questions. Now, first, I don't want to be mean, but I would like to ask a question. And then number two is about the greenhouse gas emission regulation. Can I first ask the first question first and then get the answer and then move on to the second question? I would like to talk about can you please elaborate on and direct your question to a specific person? No, it's for everybody. So I would like to talk about the skeptics for the environment. Now, for the skeptics, like if you look at Star Wars, sometimes, you have like villains with history and tradition. And now when it comes to global warming, especially the enhanced global warming is actually fake. And recently they said, well, it is happening, but then it's an exaggeration. And global warming is actually helping us. And the rationale is that well, they go against the timeline that the scientists refer to. It feels like global temperature went up based on that science, but then this is just a noise if you travel back to the birth of the planet. So now in the mainstream science community, how would you like to rebut this? And well, the reason why I asked this, we have many people who become skeptic about the environmental change, and the mainstream scientific community is not actively responding to these skepticism, and that is why I want to ask the question. Can I answer that question? Well, thank you very much for the question. Yes, it was slightly mean, but it was okay. Yes, you talked about the climate skeptics. And of course, we've had them for a very long time. We still have them. And they want to draw attention and, they just love the attention. But sometimes, they do exaggerate and they distort the facts most of the time. So now I would like to talk about the established theory. Because what they're saying is not established theory. They tend to really make a full package of lies and make it sound like it's true, but it's not. And now I would like to talk about IPCC. And they have released hundreds and thousands of papers voluntarily. And what is the level of consensus in the scientific community? Is it very rigorous or does it still have uncertainty? They actually comment on that as well when releasing official reports as well as special reports. And a few years back, it was about 90-something% of scientists agree that the disaster is man-made. And this is a totally different track that compared to what the skeptics are saying. So we have reached a conclusion about that, and I wanted to answer that question. Next, I would like to ask the second question about the climate change and the regulation for greenhouse gas emissions. Now, CHG, which is destroys the ozone layer, it's actually is a substance that can really destroy the atmosphere. But then now we have the Montreal Protocol, which regulates that. So it feels like, you get lucky and then you might be lucky enough to really restrain this. So you were able to sort of delay this. But then at Kigali, we had another meeting. And then what happened is that at the same time, HFC was added here. But then it does not really destroy the ozone layer. It rarely destroys it. But then the reason why HFC was included in the new protocol, because GWP is very much concentrated in HFC. However, we don't have strong regulation regulating this. So maybe it's like bypassing the law and bending the law. So other than HFC, maybe if you think of other substances, can we maybe have a regulation that wants to control these substances? Do we have any global movement at the global level? I will answer that question first. So you talked about the ozone hole and how CFC can actually be quite harmful to the ozone layer. So what happened is that we came up with the protocol to better manage the stratosphere. But then, of course, we do have international commitment and regulations and so on and so forth. But then we were a little bit late in controlling this. I understand that. But of course, what happens is you have like a steam or the vapor greenhouse effect. But then now the reason why we talk about CO2 is because concentration of carbon is very high. So it is subject to these regulations. And as for the six greenhouse gases, we are looking into regulations for those six gases. The same goes for methane. And we will have more protocols or regulations controlling this. And as Mr. Lee mentioned, the scientists will study and really publish the outcomes so that the policymakers can really look at the outcomes and the findings and reflect that in the policy making. So anybody who wants to answer further?
그 정도로 드리고요.
Was number one on skeptics, they always are with us. I mean, throughout the history of science, you see it. There's a lady, Naomi, the last name is difficult, at Harvard. She has written a book about tracing all these people who, the 2, 3, 5% people who always do this. With smoking, the same thing happened. And she actually traced that it's the same groups in the US who are actually doing this. So it's no surprise to any of us in the science community. And what is more, you see on the ground the effects of climate change. In June 2021, I was at the University of Cape Coast for a conference in June. That week, Canada, Vancouver, BC was hotter than West Africa. It was 51 degrees in British Columbia. I never thought I would see that. The bush fires was amazing. One city called Layton was burned down completely. The whole city was burned down because the temperature was about 50 degrees centigrade. So this skepticism and science, the evidence is that the IPCC, all of us in this, were always behind the real action. All our estimates are behind what we see on the ground. So these skeptics, will get a place to deal with them scientifically, okay? So that is one thing. And your thing about HFs is the reason we got the ozone the regulation is much simpler. There are just about 6 sources of these companies, and the politics was much better. Even the conservatives in the US supported this. So you are dealing with a different situation with climate change in a very different political climate. And this we have to have in our mind. It's a big problem. To me, it's not, yeah.
Thank you for adding the words. 네, 감사합니다. 좋은 질문.
Yes, thank you very much for the wonderful questions, and thank you very much for the answer, Professor Sumaila. We need to wrap up, so if you have more questions, maybe you can approach the speakers later on during lunch. So while many efforts are being made across the globe to achieve a sustainable planet, including the net zero 2050 goal, I believe that much more attention and action is needed to bring it to fruition. And no individual person can overcome the climate crisis. It will take the collective efforts of everybody who lives in this world and on this planet to keep working together to solve the problem. So I hope that we are all on the same page and that the climate crisis can have catastrophic consequences, and the ocean environment is changing. And I hope that we can come up with solid solutions going forward. With that, I would like to wrap up the panel discussion. Thank you very much, speakers, for the insightful presentations. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for the wonderful panel discussion. That brings an end to this session. Please give the moderator and the speakers a big hand. Thank you very much, and you may now return to your seats. I hope that you enjoyed session 5. So we will now bring an end to Day 2 of Incheon International Ocean Forum 2024. This has been a 2-day forum, and I would like to thank you for your enthusiasm and interest in the maritime industry. Now, as the moderator mentioned, it requires a collective effort to really purify the ocean and to enjoy a cleaner environment. Thank you very much for staying with us until the very end of the forum. And I give you my word that we will be back with a better version of ourselves next year. So on behalf of the Forum Committee, I would like to thank you for staying with us until the very end. Thank you and goodbye. This has been Nayoungnan.
네, 이제 오찬 안내를 현장 참석자분들.
Now, I have a few housekeeping notes about the lunch. So, for those who pre-registered, we will give you the lunch coupon. So please go to one of the restaurants downstairs to enjoy lunch. And for the speakers, we have the luncheon venue on the 3rd floor of Sheraton Hotel. So please make your way into Sheraton Hotel. Thank you very much and goodbye.